Alright, in this lesson we're going to be taking a look at the dope sheet. Now this is another part of the track view, and really what the dope sheet is all about is adjusting the timing of your keys. You're not going to be worried too much about the value of the keys as to, like let's say maybe the value of the Y translate of the key or the Z translate or anything like that. All you're really worried about is the timing of them, when the keyframe takes place in time. What I'm going to do real quick, you'll notice I've got our scene open that we've been working on. It's our little bouncing ball, so if I hit play, we can see our ball bounce across the screen. Very cool. I'm going to select the ball itself, and its trajectory has been activated. So we're going to be using the trajectory just so that we can see changes in the ball as we adjust these keys around. So let me come under Graph Editors, and I'll select Track View, Dope Sheet, and immediately we get the dope sheet visible. Now, the dope sheet comes in two flavors of its own. You can edit keys and edit ranges. Let's start off with editing keys. If we look in our main window, we no longer see curves. In fact, if we look more closely at it, all we have is time across the bottom, but we don't have a list of values along the side like we did before. What we do have are these little tick marks that just tell us where in time keyframes are occurring. Each one of these ticks is a keyframe. Now, we can use the dope sheet to move these around. So like now I've got the move tool selected, which I'm going to be covering here in just a moment. I can move this around, and you might be wondering at first, how does this score over just moving these in the timeline bar? Why wouldn't you just go ahead? Why wouldn't you do it from there? So you move them in the track bar as opposed to bringing up this window. Well, there's several reasons. One, this has a variety of tools that we can use to customize when these keys are occurring and the timing between them. Also, though, this gives us control over X, Y, and Z position. So I can just take, for example, the Z position and offset it. And you can see my trajectory up here update. In fact, let me kind of move things around up here so we can see that just a little bit better. Maybe about like so. And you can see as I move this around, our trajectory is updating to show the change. So maybe this part of the position Z is now taking place later on, so that now when we hit play, our object hangs for a second and then shoots down really quick. So you can see how just adjusting the timing can drastically change how your animation looks. Now it should be noted though that when you're moving these keys around, these move in a hierarchical fashion. So, for example, right now I can move the position Y, position Z, or even position X if I wanted to, all independently. But if I were to come up here and select position, I get the entire keyframe at this point. I get X, Y, and Z. Also, consequently, if I were to go up one stage higher and select transform, this would also select any rotation keys that I might have, or even scale keys. And then finally, I have the overall, the sphere key, which would allow me to select all keyframes on this object. And you'll notice as I slide this around, it moves all the keys at the same time. So just something to be aware of. So let me go ahead and kind of put that back roughly where it was. Now, let me go ahead and just talk briefly about some of these tools. We've seen most of them already, but we do have the Move Keys tool, which I have been using. We have Slide Keys, where you'll notice if I click, it does slide the keys around a lot like it slid the keyframes earlier when we were editing curves. Anything beyond our range gets pushed forward, anything behind it gets pushed backward, and so on. We have Add Keys, where we can just come in here and click, and it will add keyframes wherever we click on the track that we click on. So you'll notice that if I just click on, say, Z position, we only get a keyframe as Z position. So very handy. We can scale the keys. So maybe I can let's take like a marquee selection of several of the keys, and then they will scale down just like they did for curves. They're going to move to the location of the timeline cursor. So if I move the thing here, we'll notice they all scale down to that position. So the area of this cursor becomes like the pivot point of the scale. But where this is really different than editing curves is the time tools that we have. We can scale time, we can reverse time, we can insert time, we can delete time, all these great things we can do. Let me go ahead and show you how this works. First of all, we need to select a time range. Right now I've got X, Y, and Z positions selected, and that'll work great for this example. Let me select a time range here in the center, and what I've just done is I've selected the actual time within these three yellow bars. Now what can I do now that I've got this selected? First of all, I have delete time. So if I hit delete, we notice a change happen. Now a couple of things happen that are a little different than just, say, deleting these keys out just directly. First of all, if I rewind and hit play, we'll notice that our animation now ends before frame 60. It seems to be, it's actually, let's see, it's ending at frame 57 now. Also, we've lost the animation that we had that was making the thing bounce. So, to put it simply, what has happened? What we've done is we've taken everything that existed inside our time range, which essentially was these 3 keys, and we've removed them in sort of a fashion, it's kind of like a spring-loaded shelf. If we pull objects out, the other objects behind it are going to slide forward. In the same fashion, if you watch these keys down here at the end of the time range, when I hit delete, they slide down to kind of fill in the space. So it's just kind of a way to not only remove animation that you might not want, but to sort of fill in the gaps in between. Now, for those of you who are a little bit curious like right now, here's the difference between doing that and actually deleting the keys themselves. So let me select these 3 keys, I'll hit delete, and now if we hit play, we get something similar, but it's going all the way to frame 100.
Right.
These keys here at the end did not slide down to fill in the gap, so there's a big difference right there. So let me undo that to get those back in here. Also, if I select a time range like so, I can reverse time. Now, this is not going to give you a huge apparent change right now. You can notice my trajectory altering just a little bit. To really demonstrate this, let me grab a different range in time, maybe these guys here. Let's say up to these 3, and I'll reverse this. Now look at this. If you watch our original curve, we have sort of a low bounce and then a higher bounce. If I reverse the time, we get the higher bounce first and then the lower bounce. So all I'm doing is just taking these keys that fall within this time range and reversing their order so that the one that was first is now last, the one that's last is now first, and so on and so on. Potentially, you could take an entire walk cycle that you completed, select the time range for it, reverse it, and now your character is walking backwards when you hit play. So just kind of an interesting thing to be aware of there. Let me reverse this to put it back where it was. We can also scale time. Now if I select this, our cursor is going to change when it falls within our selected time range. And you can see that we can scale. And what this does, this scales back to the beginning of your time range. You don't have an arbitrary pivot, kind of like how you do when you're scaling keys normally. But what it does offer, however, if you watch really closely, is these keys that are outside this time range, they are moving down to fill in the gaps. So now if I hit play, we've sped up the animation, but we've also shortened it as well. We've sped up this one particular part, I should say.
Right.
So let's go ahead and put those back where they were. We also have the ability to insert time. Now, this is going to be one of those things that you might not use immediately, and you might be wondering why would you want to do that. But let's say, for example, we have our ball bouncing, and here at the second bounce, we need it to kind of bounce up into a tube and then roll out of the tube and fall out the other side. We couldn't normally do that without moving a great deal of keys around, selecting a bunch of keys, sliding them around. Inserting time allows us to do this very easily. We can just select a time range right in between the area where we need more time, select insert time, and then just scale out.
Wow, that's very cool.
And you see the keys actually get out of the way so that now we have this more open area of time where we can do whatever we want. As a kind of an example, just food for thought, let's say you've done an animation of a character reaching out and picking an object up off the table, like let's say a cup that's sitting on the table. You could insert some time at the part where the character is reaching over, and then also animate him picking up a pencil, putting it back down, and then continuing on to reach the cup. Essentially, it's just like kind of increasing your palette, if you will. You have more room to add animation. So, a very handy thing. Now here we have cut, copy, and paste. Now what these are going to do is they will take a selected time range. Cut is going to work exactly like delete, so if I select a time range and say cut, it's going to look like delete, except now this has been copied to a clipboard so we could potentially paste it back in. Copy will do the same thing, except it won't delete it, it'll just copy to the clipboard so we can paste it back in later. Then from here, our options are similar to what we already had. So what I want to do is go ahead and demonstrate the ranges for editing ranges. Now, what is a range? A range is what you see here, these black lines. These are going to be graphical representations of the entire animation. Now,
so basically from the first keyframe to the last keyframe.
Exactly. This has nothing to do with where independent keyframes fall. You can just think of it as taking all of our keyframes and treating them as a single object. Now, here's the deal. These move and scale and behave exactly like with edit keys in a hierarchical fashion, such that if we select the sphere track and we were to move this around, all of the ranges come with it. But if we were to take just Z position and move it around, they do stay independent of each other. So Z will move independently. Now, watch this up here. As we move Z forward, you can see my other transforms extending to accommodate the motion. So just making sure that they will all be included in this hierarchy that we have created here. Now, just as a quick example, I don't want to harp on these forever, but you just saw that we can move these. We can also select these squares here on the end and scale these down. So let's say I take the Z position and I scale this down to about frame 50. Let's say about like so. Now what's going to happen is our animation for Z, which causes our ball to go up and down, is going to be over by frame 50, and then our ball will continue to move forward. So let's hit play. All that's over by 50, and our ball continues to move because the range for position X still goes all the way to frame 100. If we were to take the range for X and drag it back to 50 as well, we've just taken our entire animation and sped it up. Consequently, and I'm not trying to beat a dead horse or drive anybody too crazy, except maybe Joel, we can just take the main sphere track here and we can scale it back to frame 50, and that also has the effect of scaling back all of our keys. In fact, if you look down here inside of our track bar, you can see all of the keys scaling to accommodate the motion.
Very cool.
So as I mentioned, this is just a way to treat all of the keyframes of your animation as a single unit.
It can be very convenient.
Absolutely. So really, that's going to cover everything that I really want to mention as far as this lesson goes. This is relatively short, but we've seen most of this stuff before. Really, what I need you to keep in mind is that the dope sheet is here so that you can edit the timing of your keys. That's the big reason that it exists. So with that, that's going to wrap up this lesson. Thanks a lot, everyone.